Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
This morning at Disability University, we're going to talk about one of our favorite topics, workers' compensation. And I'm holding before you a book that my firm produced called The Book on Comp. It's a guide to Pennsylvania workers' compensation, but there's a lot of things in here that apply no matter where you may have been hurt on the job, anywhere in the country. And Professor Mittman and I are going to go through some of the highlights of this, and there's some stuff that's very topical today. Very topical.
Absolutely.
Because, see, let's talk about what is workers' compensation?
You know, that's a great question, Professor. Workers' compensation is the first, what they call social legislation in the country to help injured workers.
You know what the first one was?
Actually, the first one I think goes back many thousands of years in Egypt or.
No. In this country, we don't have to worry about outside of America. The first one, since you asked, was a piece of legislation that George Washington created for the Continental Army. Why? Because nobody was going to necessarily go fight for these rebels and not be compensated in case they got their leg blown off or they were injured. So one of the first pieces of legislation that the United Colonies put together was a workers' compensation to award benefits for anyone who had volunteered. It was all volunteers. There was no draft or anything like that. And that is the precursor for the veterans benefits, which we're not going to talk about today, but veterans benefits, which both of us are familiar with. It's a form of workers' compensation for veterans. But anyway,
well,
pick up where you left off.
In the modern world, workers' compensation is now around 100 years old throughout the country. In fact, in 1911, there was a fire here in New York called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. For those that you don't know, a shirtwaist is nothing more than a woman's blouse. And there was a 6-story building, 7-story building in New York, and the workers, about hundreds of workers, were locked into the floor up on the 6th or 7th floor, and there was a fire. The ladders for the fire trucks couldn't reach it, and they were locked in, and over 146, mostly immigrant women, died that day.
Right.
Ironically, the day before, New York State had found the workers' compensation law unconstitutional. So these women, their families, received almost nothing. But as a result of that, and throughout the country, it was really an impetus for saying, hey, we have an industrial world, people get injured, people get disabled, what do you do? And they created this law that basically says, they call it the great trade-off. You, Mr. or Miss Employer, are going to buy an insurance policy, and in exchange for that insurance policy, the injured worker is going to get quick medical benefits, some type of lost wage benefits, and maybe some money for permanent injury. It was a trade-off, and you could not sue your employer as a result. Right. So, behind all of that was this idea that, hey, we really need to respect and help injured workers. And
what has happened? How has that evolved?
Unfortunately, that has evolved into 51, because Puerto Rico has its own system as well, if not some of the other U.S. territories. Individual state-based systems throughout the United States. Each state has its own system and its own set of bureaucracy, its own set of laws that have become an incredibly complex system where people are absolutely stuck in the quicksand of compensation. You work for years, you get hurt on the job, you just need some medical care and some money to put you over until you can get back to work, and you end up fighting insurance companies, bureaucrats, and having no idea.
Politicians. It all has taken in Pennsylvania is a couple of well-meaning politicians thinking they're saving the Commonwealth money, saving jobs, and it's basically a big lie. It's the most profitable, not to pontificate here and get into the politics of it, but the fact of the matter is that workers' compensation insurance is the single most profitable line of insurance for any insurance carrier who writes it. And in 1996, our law in Pennsylvania was changed. Supposedly at that time, carriers couldn't make any money and were exiting the state. Now we have more insurance carriers writing this coverage than I think almost any other state. And there's only one reason, because it's profitable and they can make money at it. And the profit is made at the expense of the injured worker.
Absolutely.
So if there is anything, I mean, I wrote this book so to give a leg up on someone who gets hurt on the job so they can see what they're up against. But honestly, you don't have a prayer. You do not have a prayer without an attorney here, because the insurance carrier is well represented. The employer, who may be self-insured, they have sophisticated lawyers. And while the system used to be staffed by judges either who were lay judges, you didn't have to be a lawyer to be a judge. Now in Pennsylvania you do. The deck sometimes is stacked against you, depending upon where the judge came from. If he came from a employer background, that's one thing. If it's an employee background, it's another thing. So it's a very sophisticated system, and there are all kinds of pitfalls, and we're going to talk about those here today.
Yeah, in New York, we've had the same whole reform-based movement, because it's hurting business and things like that. And the reality is we have more insurance companies than ever. In fact, the law has changed to such an extent, there is a whole section of cases that you cannot even get an attorney to represent you on, because it's not worthwhile at all. There may be no fee available to the attorney, and therefore you're actually left without representation, yet you show up at what we jokingly sometimes call the Employers' Compensation Board,
Right.
and you have to deal with this on your own. So, the books like you've written, the book like I've written for New York, and the information we provide here at the Disability University is, again, the starting point to give you guidance, to help you, to give you some hope in what can sometimes seem like a system that is just there to beat you up.
And what I have found when someone does call us, and it's usually a woman, by the way, what we have found is that if it's the woman who's injured, obviously she's going to call, but there's this syndrome called the manly man. I call it the manly man syndrome, but the guy doesn't want to be bothered. He wants to work, and finally he's so bad that, and he's been told so many lies,
Yeah.
not white lies, flat out lies, and
outright
let's
lies.
talk about them. All right, let's talk about it, because it's no different in Pennsylvania than it is here in New York.
Yeah, please.
Here's the first lie.
As you can see, this is something that both Professor Larry and I are extremely passionate about. It's what I've been doing my entire legal career, and the more I do it, the more I want to do it and to try to help people and provide this information. So let's talk about some of these lies.
Lie number one. The accident was totally your fault. You can't collect the dime.
Well, my videographer will go bleep in terms of my answer. Absolutely false. Absolute outright lie. Workers' compensation is actually the first no-fault system in the United States, meaning it doesn't matter whether it's the employer's fault or your fault, you can collect workers' compensation.
If you're on the job, basically if you're on the job, let's make it simple. If you're on the job and you're hurt, you're entitled to workers' compensation. Now here's another
Yes.
lie. You didn't work long enough. You didn't qualify. You have to be on the job, on the payroll here for maybe a week or two, friend. So I'm sorry, you weren't here long enough.
Another outright lie. Plain and simple.
When does it start?
The moment, not even the second, the moment you start working.
Now here's my favorite. The company doctor, sometimes I wonder if they really are doctors, but the company doctor says there's nothing wrong with you. What a shock and surprise that the company doctor said that.
Yeah, I wonder who pays the company doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now the reality is that just because a expert and I use that term very loosely, for the employer or the insurance company says one thing does not mean you're not entitled to benefits. That's why, particularly here in New York, for instance, you're entitled to see whatever doctor you want as long as the doctor is coded by the Workers' Compensation Board. In terms of New Jersey, for instance, you have to see certain doctors, but the reality is you are entitled to benefits and you're entitled to see doctors you want.
A lot of times I'll have clients tell me, Professor, that listen, if I don't go to this company doctor, they're going to cut off my benefits. Of course, that has nothing to do with it in Pennsylvania. And the fact of the matter is the medical care in Pennsylvania that the employer buys is not the best. In fact, it's probably near the bottom of the barrel. It's the low bid on the medical care. And, you know, I like to tell my clients, some of these surgeons, they graduate number one in their class. But if there's 50 of them in the class of surgeons, somebody graduated number 50. And that's probably who they're sending you to.
Well, while we're not getting involved in this discussion today, a favorite tool of the insurance companies are to use what are called IMEs, independent medical exams.
Is it an independent medical exam?
I only tongue-in-cheek say this, but there's nothing independent, often nothing medical, and often nothing examination like about an IME.
Right. They hardly even, you know, if I'm a judge and I hear claimant after claimant testify, he never even touched me. Now, okay, maybe you hear that once, but you hear that hundreds and hundreds of times. It boggles my mind how a judge can possibly believe anything that doctor, and they use the same doctor, the insurance companies use the same doctor over and over and over again because they're the low bidder and they're going to say whatever they want them to say. People can't believe it. You know, a doctor lying. You know how some of these doctors are lying.
I'll tell you exactly how, but what's your answer?
Well, what's your answer?
Well, my answer is here in New York, we actually have a provision in the law that's a very good provision since 2007. You are allowed to record your IME. So everybody has a smartphone now. So what we will do is
we don't have that in Pennsylvania.
We will have our clients actually videotape the IME. Now, oftentimes, instead of it being a 3-minute exam, it might now be a 6-minute exam. And we'll still get our 15-page report from this doctor. But what we've discovered when we've watched a lot of these IMEs, we'll have a 15-page exam. And the doctor will do all of these examinations for one part of the body. And that's it. The video's done. The doctor says, see, you have a great day, everything's fine. And I'll have pages of notes about other parts of the body this doctor examined. Right. And we will show this to the judge because, frankly, it's obnoxious. I wouldn't, if I was in an emergency room bleeding and one of these doctors showed up, I'd leave.
Right. Well, here's how I know they're lying. Their lips are moving. Okay? And I agree with you. I've been battling with these guys for 25, 30 years. And you look at a report that they have prepared. And clients don't believe this. Yeah. But when you show them, and you know what? There's even a service out there now. I got a letter from them. It's not a court reporting service, but it's a service that collects these depositions of these doctors. And you can order these depositions from these doctors because you have to cross-examine them to show that they have just lied their eyeballs out time and time and time again. And why do they do this? Clients do not believe, but these guys who are trying to say that the claimant is trying to put themselves over in the system for a few $1,000s, they've been paid millions.
Yeah. Well,
millions of dollars.
I think another point
to be the stooge for the insurance company.
Yeah, and it's a valid point. I think another point that we try here at the Disability University to get across to our students and everybody listening is that a lot of this is about perceptions, about the knowledge and the understanding you have. And almost all of us have been raised to believe the doctor, regardless of who the doctor is. To believe the doctor. And we're not going to talk about medical malpractice or anything, but that's an exact syndrome. More people die and are injured as a result of medical mistakes in this country than for almost any other reason or cause.
Even for injured workers. Even for injured
Absolutely.
workers.
So what we're dealing with at this point is the fact that these are the lies perpetrated by the kind of insurance industry and world out there to try to find ways for people not to apply for workers' compensation, not to get the benefits that they're entitled to, and frankly, to discourage people and make you feel like crap because, oh God, I don't want to bring a case. In fact, one last lie is you're suing your employer.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
a lie.
outright lie. It's insurance. It's not a lawsuit.
All right, well, we've only scratched the surface on some of the bigger lies. Thank you very much, Professor
Thank you,
Midman.
Professor Larry.